For over 70 years, the European security architecture rested on a single premise: the unconditional military backing of the United States. Today, that guarantee is dissolving into a transactional framework. Recent rhetoric from the American political apparatus has explicitly threatened to conditionally tie Article 5 collective defense guarantees to specific financial demands. This political shift destabilizes a long-standing model. Historically, European nations managed domestic stability by relying on three external pillars: importing cheap energy from Russia, importing cheap manufactured goods from China, and outsourcing their absolute security to the United States. That specific combination of conditions no longer exists. Russian energy supplies have been severed, global supply chains with China are contested, and American security requires increasingly steep political and economic compensation. Without guaranteed U.S. protection backing the system, minor policy adjustments will fail. The entire foundation of European geopolitical stability requires immediate structural replacement. We are now operating in a tripolar nuclear age. The United States must simultaneously deter two peer competitors: Russia, which has proven its willingness to use kinetic force, and China, which is expanding its nuclear arsenal. Because Washington's attention and resources are split across this landscape, Europe is forced to architect a parallel, self-reliant security structure. Building this independence requires executing two distinct tracks simultaneously: fielding an overwhelmingly capable conventional military force, and completely restructuring the continent's nuclear deterrent mechanisms. Europe is required to mathematically and politically construct a credible deterrent capable of functioning without the United States. To bypass the internal political decay within NATO, former Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has proposed a formalized coalition of the willing. Overwhelming conventional mass does not answer the existential question of nuclear vulnerability. To understand the nuclear deficit currently plaguing NATO, we have to look at the collapse of the global disarmament movement. In 2009, President Barack Obama committed the United States, and by extension the NATO alliance, to taking concrete steps toward a world entirely free of nuclear weapons. This timeline tracks the golden age of arms control, where Washington and Moscow implemented major reduction treaties. That momentum halted with the 2014 annexation of Crimea. The architecture collapsed entirely when the INF Treaty terminated and Russia suspended New START. Multilateral denuclearization remains structurally impossible while the global security environment remains hostile. This leaves NATO trapped in a paralyzing internal contradiction. Officially, the alliance maintains a rhetorical commitment to Global Zero, the total worldwide elimination of nuclear weapons. But the physical reality of the tripolar age contradicts this idealism. All of NATO's primary adversaries are expanding and modernizing their delivery systems. NATO attempts to reconcile this gap by publicly advocating for disarmament while relying heavily on U.S. nuclear sharing arrangements for its ultimate defense guarantee. Clinging to the idealistic Global Zero policy projects weakness and undermines the credibility of Europe's deterrence, precisely when the security environment demands absolute resolve. This matrix lays out the four distinct strategic pathways non-U.S. allies can take to secure a nuclear deterrent without unconditional support from Washington. Pathway 1 is the tripwire. This involves physically keeping U.S. nuclear assets like B-61 bombs deployed on European soil. They act as localized physical tethers that mechanically force Washington's involvement should a conflict break out. Pathway 2 is conventional substitution. By deploying the 5% GDP conventional model we discussed earlier, Europe reduces its reliance on early nuclear escalation. The conventional force becomes strong enough to absorb and halt initial kinetic attacks. Pathway 3 is the European umbrella. This demands that Europe's secondary nuclear powers, France and the United Kingdom, step up and officially extend their independent arsenals to cover the rest of the continent. Pathway 4 is strategic realism. This requires Europe to officially abandon the performative rhetoric of Global Zero. Doing so signals a permanent, unyielding nuclear commitment to adversaries. By successfully combining these four pathways, Europe allows for the construction of a viable deterrent, reducing the strategic risk of an American withdrawal. European survival requires a dual-track approach: overwhelming conventional mass, combined with strict, independent nuclear mitigation. Relying solely on extended deterrence fails the moment political consensus in Washington fractures. Establishing a 5% GDP defense perimeter demands hard domestic financial sacrifices from European citizens. Funds must be reallocated from social programs to industrial military production. It also requires an ideological sacrifice. The continent must shift from a posture of hopeful disarmament to one of pragmatic, unapologetic deterrence. This topological map shows the final architecture, the independent UK and French nuclear umbrellas operating over the newly hardened conventional forces. Within this structure, the remaining US bases act as a final, localized failsafe, rather than Europe's primary shield. The future of European security depends on an overlapping, self-reliant network of hardened conventional capabilities